Bun găsit la emisiunea Știință și Cunoaștere. Peste câteva momente vom difuza partea a treia a interviului cu fostul consilier al Papei Ioan Paul al II-lea la Vatican, teologul Miceal Ledwith, unul dintre cei mai importanți membri ai Comisiei Teologice Internaționale, care îl sfătuia pe papă asupra chestiunilor teologice de maximă importanță. Împrejurările dramatice prin care a trecut, acuzații nedovedite în care a fost implicat, precum și două maladii grave de care s-a vindecat, toate acestea l-au determinat pe Miceal Ledwith să aducă o nouă viziune asupra religiei și credințelor, demolând miturile și construind ipoteze îndrăznețe sau speculații ce își așteaptă confirmarea sau infirmarea. O să repet din nou faptul că există o psihologie de simț comun puternic imprimată la nivelul conștientului și subconștientului colectiv, care în această zonă geografică este focalizată cu mare intensitate asupra elementului religios. Nu aș fi avut niciodată în planul emisiunilor Știință și Cunoaștere asemenea tematici care ar putea fi o amenințare la adresa acestei psihologii de simț comun dacă nu aș fi avut privilegiul de a-l întâlni pe domnul Ledwith. Părerile exprimate de către domnul Miceal Ledwith nu contravin legii în vigoare, dar cu toate acestea, din proprie inițiativă, am introdus în textul de subtitrare, cât și pe imagini, o notă scurtă prezentată între paranteze, urmată de prescurtarea NR, adică nota redactorului. Aceasta înseamnă că acele cuvinte scrise între paranteze nu fac parte din traducere, ci ele reprezintă indicațiile mele referitoare la ideea cuprinsă în cele două rânduri ale respectivului fragment. Suplimentar am mai introdus un element de avertizare cu o bandă albastră orizontală unde apare cuvântul speculație. Aceasta înseamnă că până la data difuzării în premiera interviului, în primăvara anului 2014, nu există suficiente probe pentru a confirma sau infirma declarațiile respective și am rugămintea să țineți cont de aceste avertismente atunci când veți viziona fiecare episod. Iată ce veți putea viziona peste câteva momente. Ce sunt reliquiile sfinților și dacă au ele vreun rol esențial în viața celor credincioși sau e doar o superstiție? O întâlnire la cină cu Nelson Mandela. Un incident asemănător cu cel despre care ne vorbise în emisiunea trecută cu Dalai Lama. După care urmează un subiect șocant, semnificația învierii și speculația domnului Ledwith, care sugerează fenomenul ca fiind un mit elaborat ulterior. Misterul de la René Le Chateau cu presupusele morminte ale lui Isus și Maria Magdalena, care au constituit scenariul unui film documentar difuzat pe canalele Discovery, codul lui Da Vinci și miturile despre Biblioteca Vaticanului. Adevărata misiune a lui Isus, o ipoteză construită logic de către domnul Ledwith, dar cumva din prisma propriei sale experiențe de vindecare. Iar în acest context este necesar să vă reamintesc utilizarea frecventă a unei metafore. Câmpul cuantic este așadar doar o metaforă care se referă la faptul că puterea interioară poate fi accesată dacă manifestăm acele gânduri și idei ce ne focalizează cât mai bine în prezentul infinitezimal al clipei, singurul element temporal care este cu adevărat real și care se manifestă în realitatea noastră biologică materială. Am spus și în episoadele trecute acest fapt, dar e nevoie să-l repet. Trecutul este doar o amintire, iar viitorul este doar o iluzie. Dar ele sunt conceptualizate numai din punct de vedere didactic în analize și proiecte care necesită estimări. Atunci când o boală extrem de gravă, precum ceea ce a avut domnul Ledwith, amenință viața, domnia sa spune că este dezastruos să oferim minții noastre gânduri și idei legate de boală, expectanțe legate de un viitor improbabil sau păreri de rău legate de un trecut care s-a consumat definitiv. Nu ne putem întoarce în trecut și nici nu putem călători în viitor. Dar ceea ce putem face este de a ne crea prezentul de care avem nevoie. Domnul Ledwith face o declarație pe care o repetă de mai multe ori pe parcursul interviului și anume aceea că misiunea cea mai importantă a lui Isus a fost de a ne învăța cum să facem acest lucru, aparent simplu și totuși extrem de dificil de realizat. Numai puțin importante sunt mențiunile sale legate de mitologia greacă și egipteană, care relevează existența încă cel puțin 11 sau 12 așa ziși salvatori ai lumii și care toți au trecut prin exact aceleași experiențe, toți născuți în 25 decembrie și alte cel puțin 10 caracteristici comune. Despre toate acestea și multe altele veți afla în minutele următoare, după următorul avertisment. Afirmațiile exprimate în acest program nu aparțin producătorilor, colaboratorilor și cu atât mai puțin Televiziunii Române și ca atare nu pot fi atribuite acestora. Ele aparțin în exclusivitate domnului Miceal Ledwith, care are o experiență bogată pe tărâm religios, inclusiv în sferele cele mai înalte ale Vaticanului. Producătorul și colaboratorii, precum și instituția Televiziunii Române, nu susțin și nu încurajează în niciun fel renunțarea la convingerile și credințele religioase proprii, care sunt o expresie majoră a libertății individuale. Toate opiniile domnului Miceal Ledwith, asociate cu vindecarea unei maladii incurabile, sunt însoțite de acte medicale eliberate de către o instituție medicală din străinătate, unde acesta a efectuat analize și tratamente medicale. Ideile și părerile prezentate de către invitatul emisiunii nu trebuie considerate ca fiind sfaturi medicale și nu pot fi folosite pentru diagnoza sau tratamentul unor afecțiuni. Considerăm că pentru diagnoză și tratament este necesară consultarea unor medici specialiști care pot oferi recomandări și terapii medicale autorizate. Televiziunea Română este deschisă la orice păreri și sugestii formulate decent care susțin sau contrazic afirmațiile domnului Miceal Ledwith. Acestea vor putea constitui subiectul unor emisiuni viitoare. Dear Miceal, welcome back to our second long interview on science and knowledge here on TVR Cluj, Romania for part 3.
Thank you so much, Christian. I'm delighted to be back with you and delighted to have this wonderful opportunity to address our viewers in Romania, a country of which I have the fondest of memories. And I think that its place in the evolution of the culture and history of Europe has never been sufficiently acknowledged. So I am delighted on many fronts, modern and ancient, to have this glorious opportunity with you one more time.
I'm enjoying so much doing this interview. I thank you. Thank you very much.
I hope you don't mind the amount of heresy we're having here.
On the contrary, I am happy you agreed to disclose for the public for the first time ever things which need to be known about the Bible, religion, and the real mission of Jesus.
Exactly. Exactly. Thank you.
About that, let me ask the next question. What do you know about the relics of saints, which in certain cases had not been ever proved to be their actual membership? Someone today, or even hundreds of years ago, could make any claims to some high priest that he is in the possession of certain relics, but how can we be sure that they are what it had been claimed they are? Could be just manipulation in some cases, or in many cases.
My beloved friend, in the words of the esteemed president of this country, Barack Obama, your questions, as he would say, are above my pay grade. But I'll do my best within those limitations. I'm not an expert in the provenance of relics. But one thing I would say, I mean, if there were a truly great person who lived among some group or nation of people, a lot of people, when that magnificent person died, let's translate it into modern phraseology. Say Mother Teresa. A lot of people held her in the highest possible regard, including myself. So if you had some relic of Mother Teresa, a piece of her garments that she wore, or maybe even some of the hairs of her head, or even later maybe a bone of her skeleton, I think everyone would feel who knew her or revered her that this was some precious connection that someone had with that great being. Yeah. Now that's good as far as it goes. We all recognize that. Say my mother, unfortunately I was a student in Germany when my mother died, and then we were very close to each other. But my brother gave me a few hairs of her head before she was buried. I got there for the burial. He gave me a few hairs of her head, and that's been something that I regard as very precious to me for a very loving being who was so close to me in this life. So there's nothing wrong with that, of us wanting some physical, tangible souvenir at its lowest form of any great individual. Now, once we move beyond that, and this, of course, I think is what you're focusing on, that some mystical powers or whatever begin to become attached to this relic. Now we're in a different ball game. And I think that the fantastic spread of the cult of relics in the Middle Ages, which is one of the things that Martin Luther, for example, in the Reformation in Germany, revolted against, things had gone too far. In other words, relics were revered, and they were supposed to do something wonderful for me. If I had the relics of a saint around my neck, I was going to be preserved forever from all harm and evil, etc. Just like, and I know one person who did this, and I know two persons who did this, You've heard of scapulars that people wear over their necks with a religious badge on the front and a religious badge on the back, supposedly to have been revealed by the appearance of the mother of Jesus at Mount Carmel in the, whatever, century, 12th century. And apparently the mother of Jesus, which I assure you was not the mother of Jesus, because the mother of Jesus had bigger fish to fry, if you understand that metaphor in Romania.
Yeah.
Because you only have the Black Sea, so you may not have that variety of fish to choose from, unlike the Pacific Northwest or the Atlantic where I grew up. So the mother of Jesus allegedly said, if you wear this scapular and keep these thoughts in mind and cherish my teachings, which I'm giving you today, you will never have to go to hell. And I know people who, because they have heard this teaching, which is 800 years old now, they wear this emblem in all sincerity, and I applaud that sincerity. I'm not against it. They wear it, but the way that they understand it is superstitious. And now I know what people are going to say to me because of what I'm going to say in the next 5 minutes. They're going to say what I'm going to say to you. You're accusing him of being superstitious, unquote. All right. Now, I've already said to you what you're going to accuse me of in the next 5 minutes. I know people who wear these religious objects and, in accordance with the apparition 800 years ago, say, if you wear this, you will never go to hell and burn for all eternity. Now, they have removed that from something really valid, which is if you live according to these prescriptions in that apparition, 800 years ago, you're going to live a blameless life, a very evolving style of life. But they interpret it to mean, I have to wear this piece of cloth around my neck at all times and in diverse places, as the Old Testament might say. That means whenever I'm going to take a shower, I have to still wear this cloth emblem around my neck, and I have my shower. And then I've got to solve the inestimable problem of changing. If I have two versions of my scapular, I have to exchange the wet one around my neck when I dry myself coming out of the shower with the dry one right there. But meanwhile, never be exposed to one moment when I do not have the scapular around my neck. Because if I have one instant while I'm exchanging the dry one for the wet one, God may take me and condemn me in that split moment. That is why people wear the scapular in the shower. And obviously they're not going to wear a wet scapular all day, so they have to change it. But they have to get the dry one on and the wet one off so that there's no possible interval intervening between the two. That is absolute superstition. Now, I know a lot of people who did that. Some very lowly, some very high. Mother Teresa wore that scapular. John Paul II wore that scapular. I mean, I have pictures of him wearing it before he was ever Pope, but I knew he still wore it as Pope. Now, did John Paul II ever have to change a dry for the wet scapular? I don't know. I am not privy to the secrets of the papal household. No one is. So, someone will now accuse me, you're accusing John Paul II of being a superstitious person. I'm not. I'm saying that he always wore the scapular, as did my mother, Teresa, and I have the highest regard for those two people. I still do, and I always will. Am I accusing them of being superstitious? No, but I'm saying there's a multitude of people who wear that scapular who feel that if I take off my wet scapular, or suppose I'm going to take a shower and I leave off my scapular, which is a sensible thing, and have my shower for 4, 5, 6 minutes, depending on how eco-conscious you are about the wastage of water, that God is somehow going to take advantage of me lowering my guard, and God is going to zip in there and seize me off to condemnation with Satan and his angels because I left off the scapular for 5 minutes. Now that's when we're into superstition. And it also reveals our picture of God, who is a vengeful, capricious deity waiting for a moment to seize you. The scapular prevents his malicious advances towards me. Jesus, can you not understand how far you have got away from the teachings of Jesus Christ with this? You are light years away from it.
Yeah.
That's all I'm saying. Don't send me an email. As Nelson Mandela, who I had dinner with one time, just after he was elected president, it was in June of 1994. He was a very tortured man. He held a lot of resentment. Who could blame him? By God, 27 years separated from your family. Who could blame him? But just like the Dalai Lama, you know, on that specific occasion, when I did it, how can you get to know a person over dinner? You can't, but you can get some clue. But on my dinner with Nelson Mandela in June of 1994, I said to him, your experience in prison was a horrific thing that obviously should never have happened. But just like the Dalai Lama's expulsion from Tibet, I didn't quote that to him, but in the light of our interviews here, I'm saying to Nelson Mandela, in the light of what we've been discussing, however horrific it was for you, would you perhaps not agree that your message would never have got out to the world and liberated so many people, including the people in your own country of South Africa, a wonderful country, I've been there many times. Would your message have ever got out if you had not been imprisoned? The answer is it would not. So I suggested to him on that auspicious night, we did not get on well at the dinner, as you might expect. He didn't like me because I was pushing his buttons. And I suppose he was pushing mine as well. Anyway, we didn't get on. But at the end of the dinner, I said to him precisely what I quoted to you. Would your power today, which was manifested, you know, not so long ago, in the outpouring of 96 heads of state being at his funeral, would he have ever had that impact on the world without the 27 awful years on Robben Island? The bottom line, like the Dalai Lama's expulsion, would be no. Like John Paul's II attempted suicide. I saw him when he came out of that recovery. We were the first group that he met. He was a changed man.
Amazing, amazing. It is very important that we should expose the myths, because there are a lot of myths, and I found on your website an analysis about what did the resurrection of Jesus really mean, and there are 6 hypotheses.
There's a lot of heresy on my website.
Yeah. What did the resurrection of Jesus really mean? A. The disciples stole his body from the tomb. B. Someone else stole the body without the knowledge of the disciples. C. The disciples hallucinated when they thought they saw Jesus. D. Jesus managed to survive the crucifixion and was resuscitated in the tomb, after which he traveled to the east.
That's the Muslim belief, by the way. That's what the Muslims believe about him.
E. Jesus truly did rise from the dead. F. Jesus was sentenced to death by crucifixion, but was substituted for by Simon of Cyrene on the way.
You've got all that from my website, I assume.
Yes.
So let me start from the bottom up. If Jesus was substituted for, ending on a preposition, which is a big no-no in the English language, but if he were substituted for, which is a preposition, by Simon of Cyrene or someone else, then all of the other questions are rendered moot and irrelevant. Would you not think?
Yeah.
If I answer the last question, all the others are answered as well. I am skipping them all because I'm answering the bottom one. And the bottom question, the last question you read out, answers all of the preceding questions. Because if Jesus were never crucified, I'm saying he was hauled before Pontius Pilate and the high priest, Caiaphas. He was mocked. He was crowned with thorns. He was tortured with a purple robe and spit upon and all of that stuff. He was scourged, which was a cruel form of punishment, way above the number of strokes that were normal. I'm saying he did go through all of that. And his mission was interrupted. It was far shorter than it was intended to be. So only part of his mission got explained at that time. But even that quarter of his mission that got explained at that time has been absolutely turned on its head by the Christian churches. And that's their biggest issue, not some secret document in the Vatican secret archive. They've corrupted the main message of Jesus. They need to attend to that first. That is their biggest fish they have to fry. We'll deal with lesser things later. But supposing anyway that Jesus was not ever crucified, supposing he was substituted for on the way up the hill of Calvary by some heroic man who stood in his place, a great man, by the way, a great master. Who else would stand into that position? So then we have answered all the other questions that you have read out. Jesus wasn't ever crucified. He did not die on the cross. If he did not die on the cross, then, horror of horrors, the multitude of the Christian world would come screaming at me, because even though they say they love Jesus, they're irate when he didn't suffer enough. We want Jesus to suffer. How can you say you love Jesus and still proclaim disappointment that he didn't become crucified? It's because you haven't a clue of what we're talking about. With apologies, you haven't. So, supposing Jesus were never crucified, don't you think it would be a little over the top to rise from the dead, seeing he was never dead? That's why I'm saying the last question answers all the others. Was someone else in the tomb? Yes. Was in the garden tomb in Jerusalem today. But all the other questions go by the board, including the favorite quotation I gave to you of Mary Magdalene being the first to see someone whom, remember, whom they did not recognize. You remember that?
Yes, yes.
Do you remember that? There's the clue. The person that they saw coming out of the tomb, they did not recognize. It is there in the text. The inspired written word of God, according to Christianity. They didn't recognize him for good reason. Because the person who came out of that tomb was not the person who met the disciples on the road to Emmaus and who sat down and shared bread and fish with them later. Because Jesus had not been crucified. And after that, he went to the east, where he had been as a young man. I mean, if you consult a source that was also discovered, the scrolls of Nicholas Notovich, which were discovered in the monastery of Hemus in Tibet. And I remember the head of another monastery, Puri, Krishnatirtha, came to this country a long time ago and said that identical scrolls to Notovich's scrolls about the teenage years of Jesus, his journey to India and Tibet and to Egypt, are found in all of the major monasteries of India today and presumably Tibet. So now you have an entirely different perspective of what Jesus came to teach. And let nobody approach me in vengeance because I'm saying Jesus didn't die on the cross. If you loved Jesus, you would be delighted that he didn't have to die on the cross. I rest my case.
Please tell us about the connection between René Le Chateau, Jesus, Mary Magdalene, and the Da Vinci Code.
Well, I first found that book, Dan Brown, from whom I have a great regard. He's an excellent novelist, excellent, hyper-caffeinated stuff, as a lot of people say. But I first met Dan Brown's book, The Da Vinci Code. Angels and Demons had been written before The Da Vinci Code, as you know, but hadn't made as big a success. So it was issued later than The Da Vinci Code, after that book, and rode on the coattails of the Da Vinci Code, and the movies, etc., were made after that. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. I am just saying that I first found Dan Brown's book. I was on the way to Ecuador to conduct a conference, and I bought the book in the airport, the Da Vinci Code by Dan Brown. And on the way from, I think it was Houston or Dallas, I can't remember which, I think maybe Houston, from Houston to Quito in Ecuador, I read the entire book. It's quite a long flight, so it's not a heroic accomplishment. But I said to myself, I wish Dan Brown had sat down with me for half an hour before he released this book, because he made several blunders in historical fact. And they would have been so easily rectified. I'm not saying that in any form of self-aggrandizement here. I'm just saying I thought it was a magnificent book. But I said, if he had only changed these things, I'm sure they're going to attract all the criticism. And they could have been changed with very little effort. And the positive side would have been allowed to flourish without the negative mistakes that he made then. But anyway, needless to say, the book was already published. So what did Jesus do if he had not been crucified? I mean, he appeared to the disciples, as we know, on the road to Emmaus and so forth, and then disappeared. He went to the east, which these texts also speak about. And then, which these texts do not speak about, that then he rejoined Mary Magdalene and their daughter Sarah and their son James Jr., in that particular region. And some people say that Jesus and Mary Magdalene are buried near Rennes-le-Château. Now, it's without doubt that Mary Magdalene was there, and in her cave, which has suffered some things because of the rise of the level of water and so forth, is not as magnificent as it once was, that she taught people the teachings of Jesus for about 30 years there and died. And the rumor is that she and Jesus are buried there near Rennes-le-Château. Now, you know, there was a big movie made some years ago. I can't remember. I know it's Bruce. Bruce was the filmmaker. I mean, I've had him here, right here, to visit me, and another man called Ben Hamoth, who came and gave us a talk in the Ramtha School of Ancient Wisdom a couple of years ago. They said, at least Ben Hamoth said, that he had found this tomb and that he had lowered a hook down into the tomb, and he had a camera and he had pulled back the burial cloth and he saw a male and a female figure unveiled by it, and he was going to get permission to uncover this archaeological site. Now, knowing the French archaeological authorities, even vaguely as I do, I said, my God, this man is asking for trouble. The next time he sets foot on French soil, he's going to be sent to Devil's Island for the rest of his career. But anyway, he was looking for permission to open up this tomb. But of course now, you know, a couple of years ago, about maybe not quite 2 years ago yet, the discovery was exposed on a radio show that Ben Hamoth had faked all of this. He had faked all of this discovery. All of the scenes of uncovering the tomb of Mary Magdalene and Jesus were filmed in a warehouse in Northumbria in the north of England. It was all a fake. He had deceived the filmmakers and the filmmaker's wife, whom I had both here visiting me. So that doesn't mean that there is not a tomb at Rennes-le-Château waiting to be discovered. But what it definitively does mean is that the tomb that was aired on that movie and got such a widespread audience throughout the world, that is totally without any validity whatsoever, good, bad, or indifferent. No tomb of Mary Magdalene and Jesus has been found so far at Rennes-le-Château.
Please tell us about the real mission of Jesus Christ and if Apostle Paul met him in person or not.
I'm saying the mission of Jesus Christ was to teach us to be masters of the quantum field. He wasn't crucified. Therefore, he did not need to rise from the dead because he was beyond that. But he taught us something much, much more than that. Therefore, I will not be distracted into saying whether Paul was right or wrong in his estimate. Paul never got the fullness of what Jesus was about. You remember, Paul never met Jesus. Passé that awkward interview on the road to Damascus. He never met Jesus in his lifetime. He spent 2 weeks with James, his brother, in Jerusalem as his house guest. And the one thing you notice about the writings of Paul, which precede the entire New Testament, if he spent 2 years, or 2 weeks rather, with the brother of Jesus, who was the first priest, bishop, whatever you want to call it, there were no distinctions in those days, If you want to be focusing on what Paul's experience of Jesus was, it was through his brother James in those 2 weeks. But one thing you notice in the writings of Paul, his first writing was in the year 51, about 2 years after that. 51. When did the first gospel appear? Quite a while afterwards. But you notice about the writings of Paul, he never mentions one time something that became of inestimable importance afterwards. He never mentions the virgin birth of Jesus. Have you noticed that?
Yeah.
Not once in the writings of Paul is the virgin birth of Jesus mentioned. Now, God Almighty, you know, if he's a house guest of James and they have breakfast, dinner, and supper together and talk as they apparently did all day. If they talked all day for 2 solid weeks and something magnificent like the virgin birth had happened, don't you think James might have mentioned it even in passing? And number 2, don't you think that Paul might have mentioned it later? Well, it's obvious that James didn't mention it, and neither did Paul mention it. And what's the obvious conclusion? It never happened. It was an invention of later. And I have quoted you before, at least there's an article on my website to which you refer, when I have quoted the existence of 12 other entities in human history who were born on the 25th of December, who had a human mother but a God father, etc., who were suffered and crucified. It's just look, bottom line, coming back to Paul, I have no issue with Paul, but he never knew Jesus. And I'm not going to set myself up as a cockshot whereby all of the rest I have said might be conveniently dismissed by those who don't have the objectivity. I'm not asking for generosity of mind, but objectivity of mind to understand what I'm saying and the context. So with respect, if Jesus did not rise from the dead, just like the list of questions you posed from my website, if he didn't die, it should hardly have been necessary to rise from the dead. So likewise, with regard to Paul the Apostle, if Jesus didn't die, I do not feel it necessary to answer the question of Paul the Apostle. All I will say is this: Jesus did teach us how to be masters of the quantum field. So therefore, if Jesus has not risen from the dead, is all that void? I say no. Jesus taught us what he did, and if we follow it, all of what the resurrection could ostensibly have promised is already ours. In other words, the essence of the mission of and the teaching of Jesus is not dependent on whether he rose from the dead or whether he didn't rise from the dead or whether he half rose from the dead. It is about something else entirely. It's about his teachings, that we're living in a quantum field. How do we create in it? It's all over the New Testament. Let's focus on that. And let's leave this thing about it's all or nothing on the resurrection of Paul. Yes. It's like going to the casino and putting all your chips on one number. Paul put all his chips on one number. The resurrection of Jesus in the physical body out of an alleged tomb. I will not draw the conclusions because that is a concession I'm not willing to make right now. You should draw that for yourself.
Yeah. Please tell us about the other dying and resurrecting world saviors and those 11 common characteristics that you mentioned on your paper. Why were all born in the same date of December 25th?
For the same reason that Jesus is alleged to be born on that day. I've already discussed with you. Yeah. He was not born on that day, and I've explained why.
Yes, but there are even more similarities. Their fathers are gods, their mothers are virgin humans.
Right. Keep going.
They were all born in a cave or cow shelter.
Right.
Shepherds came to witness shortly after the birth.
Right, correct.
Each triumphantly entered a city on a donkey while people waved palm branches.
Palm branches, correct. Keep going.
Each changed water into wine at a wedding.
Correct.
Each offers a rebirth through the waters of baptism.
Right.
Each dies and descends to the realm of the dead, Hades.
It's the region of the underworld in the classic Latin and Romanian. Hades is the region of the underworld. So each descended to Hades, and
each ascends into heaven, where followers await their return to judge the world.
right, the second coming.
Yes, and the 11th is where death and resurrection are remembered in a ritual meal of bread, wine, and water, which are their body and blood.
Right. So you're quoting, I think you're quoting one of my articles on my website, hamburgeruniverse.com.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for such a detailed reminiscence of what I said there. The trouble with all of this is if we confront all of these, I think in addition to being 12 saviors, I don't know how many issues you've quoted, maybe close to 12 also. The similarities between the tale of Jesus that we've inherited and the tale of these 12 other great beings. I mean, the being, their father was a god and their mother was a mortal, and when they're born in a stable and they had shepherds and so all of the wise men coming to greet them afterwards. I don't know how many issues those are, maybe 10 or 12. Really, the amount doesn't matter.
Yeah.
All of these preceded Jesus. All of these incidents occurred. I mean, I'm thinking, you might say, who are these saviors who shared all these things in common? People like Adonis, people like Attis, people like Tammuz, people like Horus, people like Mithra, for example, people like Orpheus, people like Osiris, people like Thor, people like Bedru, etc. I mean, these are all a matter of history. I think at the time I wrote that article, I counted 12 of them. I don't know if there are more. I'm sure there might well be. Well, I'm sure people have their own opinions about my enumeration. But the point is, even if it wasn't 12, maybe it was 9. The facts are still there. That these were the qualifications for a God entering into humanity. And isn't it suspicious that all of these categories should have been applied to Jesus? Now, the people who wrote the New Testament, and please, the risk of going out on a limb like I'm doing and you're doing to another degree is that people will fix on an example, never get what you're saying, but fix on an example to nail you. That's the risk we're taking, because we're laying everything out, but we don't mean that everyone who hears it will take everything in. They will just take one narrow thing on which to zoom in on you like a drone missile. And of course, then that's their privilege, because they can't hear, they don't understand an invitation to become much more powerful than they are. Nobody can contest that. Nobody can say you should not do that, because we are all gods, as Jesus said. You are all gods. Why do you condemn me? They are all gods. He said that. They were trying to take him, remember it was in Capernaum, when he had spoken in the synagogue, and he said, quoting Psalm 82, you are all gods. Why do you behave like helpless humans? Now, this is the thing that any enlightened series of talks like you are doing your very best to put out there is coming up against. The one thing that will make people so irate, so determined to wipe you and me out, is that we have suggested to them that they have an awesome power that they're not using. They're going to say, how dare you? We're going to kill you. Why? Because I have said you have an awesome ability. There's somehow something about our profound state of victimization that once someone shows the light of how you may exit from it, we want to kill them and wipe out the clue that is leading us out of the cave. That's what Jesus meant when he came out of the, what do you call the Jewish meeting place? The synagogue in Capernaum. They said, how dare you say we are all gods? And there was a mob there. They wanted to drag him and push him over the cliff to kill him. It's the one instance where he stopped them, because he had the power to do that. He stopped them and he challenged them. He said, why do you want to kill me? because I have said what is in your own scriptures? It is in their scriptures. Psalm 82, he didn't refer to the psalm, but it's in Psalm 82, if you care to look it up. But this is a really crucial incident if we're really sincerely committed to following this understanding and clearing away all of the veils. Whenever a glorious destiny about power is revealed to people, they want to kill the individual or the circumstance that revealed it. Why? Because they don't want to stand up and take responsibility. They prefer to blame God or someone else. That's what Jesus said. So, did he allow them to throw him over the cliff as they wanted? No. The only time recorded, he walked through them because he did not permit that to occur. But that is our big challenge about all of this. The one thing the ordinary human being is not willing to hear, and anyone who is interested in some way, shape, or form about contributing something for the human race to emerge out of its victimization, pain, and fear to a higher power, the biggest barrier to that is the individual to which you are talking. The person you are trying to help is the first to try to kill you. Everyone knows that for a very long time. And it's as true of these programs as it ever was been in the past.
There are people today in the 21st century who still believe that the world had been created about 6,000 years ago.
That's correct. It's more than enough time to have got the message, don't you think? Well, yeah, I referred to this already earlier in the questions, but the place, of course, where this originated is obviously the early books of the Old Testament, or the Hebrew Bible, as the Jews call it, which is also part of the Christian scriptures today. So the book of Genesis was written in Babylon. It's when the Jews were in exile in Babylonia or Mesopotamia, whatever. It was written there. It was not written in Israel. But it was, and I hesitate to use the word that might be misleading or that might cause someone else to take a pot shot. I don't mind people taking pot shots at me or you, provided they realize what they're aiming at. But mostly people take pot shots because someone is probing their buttons and asking them to move out of their little cocoon in which they're victims and powerless entities in front of a savage, capricious, vindictive God. Everyone needs to move out of that because it's not true. But if you disturb someone in their cocoon, it's like waking you up, at an ungodly hour in the morning. You want to kill the person who wakes you up, even in the morning, whether it's your mother, your father, or someone else. Likewise, anyone on a cosmic scale who wants to awaken us from a mindset of victimization and powerlessness, we want to kill them. It's just like being woken up in the morning when I'm paining all over and am immersed in sleep. It's exactly the same. This is a good image of it. Except, obviously, you're not going to kill your father and mother who call you at 4:30 in the morning. But when someone wants you to call at 4:30 on a cosmic scale, which means rise up out of your cocoon and take into account the fact that you are all emanations of the Creator, that you have this awesome power within you. Now we really want to kill that person. No longer metaphorically, like your father and mother, but literally. Because the biggest obstacle, I repeat it for the second time, the biggest obstacle to anyone entering into enlightenment is themselves. They will kick and scream as they're hauled into enlightenment. And of course, you cannot haul someone into enlightenment. They have to go there themselves. Can anyone eat your breakfast for you? No. Neither can you do this for you. Nobody, Jesus, nobody can do this for you. This is something inescapably personal, like eating your own breakfast. Does anyone want to wake up and eat their own breakfast for them? No. They want to be spoon-fed. They want to be assured that there is the same kind of benevolent being in the skies watching over them, making sure they do not put a disastrous foot wrong, and if they make the wrong choices, correcting it subtly behind the scenes. That kind of benevolent parent in the skies, which is what our own beloved parents were, if we were lucky enough to have such parents. When we grow up, we want to replace our physical parents with a presence in the skies that will take care of everything like they did, and that will rock us to sleep. In other words, we want to be assured that we have a cosmic parent taking care of us, and we have imposed that duty on Jesus and God, when the exact opposite of that was what they were preaching. Why don't you realize you have a greater power within you to take care of you than any hypothetical parent in the skies ever could, or God in the skies ever could? Is this a challenge to God? No, it's an affirmation of what God and Jesus were teaching. But will this message be welcomed with open arms? No, it will be welcomed with open machetes to kill you, to prevent you disturbing their sleep in the cocoon of victimization, guilt, fear, and powerlessness.
Yes, you are correct. And for example, many people seeking therapies today, always they are seeking something which comes from outside, which is a therapist, a healer, a doctor, a physician. And they are staying, doing nothing, and expect for whatever person, therapy, electronic device to do the healing for them and took off the disease from their body.
Right. Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. Now, I mean, there's nothing wrong with therapy. We all need the help of therapy. We all need the help of medicine, etc., from time to time. But coming to the stage that you're talking about, which is when we have availed of that, and now we come to a stage where no medicine, like your friend, for example, with transverse myelitis. We're at a stage where no longer any conventional therapy can help us. I mean, it's the ultimate stupidity and the ultimate victimization to say, I will not resort to medicine to help me. I will not resort, because God can do everything. That's, it's in abstract terms, it's true. But you are not at the stage where you can drop your own preemption of the power of God working in you. You say, God will heal my child. We've had a tragic example in this country last week of parents who wouldn't go to the doctor and let their child die because they said God would heal him. And God will heal him in response to our prayers. That's true in the abstract. But the point is that those parents, well, I shouldn't be saying this, but I'm saying we can put ourselves in the position whereby we have an inflated idea of the level to which we have purified ourselves, where that would be a reality. Is it true in the abstract that this could be? It is. But the major block is that the people who are saying that, who have care of this little child, have not purified themselves enough to be able to allow the power of God to come through. And therefore they let the child die. This is not kosher. It's called self-inflated importance. I say that with great respect, because I know it's out of ignorance. And I'd say that with the greatest respect, because I don't want to be put in the position of judging people. I'm noticing it objectively. I'm not personally involved. So don't put ourselves into the place where we say we can heal, which we could if we did some work on it. But don't put ourselves into the place where we say we can heal when we're not up to it. For God's sake, go to your doctor, do whatever needs to be done on the physical plane. And if that fails, then move to this realm and purify yourself. Because there's nothing that blocks the power of point zero, the creator God, from flowing into each of us, which are just on different levels of frequency. There's nothing preventing that occurring to healing or changing my situation, whether I'm poverty-stricken or anything else. There's nothing blocking that manifestation except me. But please don't put your child on the line to prove how barren your estimate of yourself actually was. I'm saying that for the future, not in judgment on the past.
Another thing that profoundly disturbed me is that the religion is telling me that I'm a natural-born sinner and this is due to some which they call, in the Old Testament, the original sin. I find this very difficult for me to embrace, this idea in my daily life.
You're right, because it's not true. So therefore you should have found it very hard to accept. Where does this come from? It comes from the tradition of Jehovah. And if you have studied any of these texts that we discussed earlier tonight, especially the documents that were discovered in Nag Hammadi, as I mentioned, in this century, the Dead Sea Scrolls discovered in the 40s of the last century, and a lot of the stuff that were discovered in Sumeria and Babylon in the middle of the 1800s. And basically what we have discovered from all of that, to put it in a nutshell, is that the person who masqueraded as the god of the early peoples was regarded as a god because the individual had superior technology. And as a result, the images that attached to that series of encounters in the past were images of a human, not from this earth, but a very evolved human in terms of technology. And as a result, we have all these things to account for that are still on the books with regard to that entity. The entity who mandated the elimination of the entire Canaanite population when the Hebrews were coming into the Promised Land, etc., etc. I mean, in one of the stages of my talks, I gave an entire 5-hour presentation, 10-hour, 12-hour presentation on this. Now that's fine, you know, if you're talking about a period, say around 1800 BC, which is what we are talking about, starting at that period and moving up, say, to about 500 BC. That's fine if you're talking about a period that's 2.5 millennia ago. The tragedy is that those same insight into what was regarded as God are still officially on the books today. Yeah. So instead of those qualifications entitling you to be regarded as God, nowadays that same list, they're still in written form in every bedside locker in the land in this country. Open up, the Gideon Bible is there. Look up the references, they're still there. Those same qualifications that are ascribed to God would qualify you today not to be regarded as God, but to appear before the Court of Human Rights at The Hague for genocide and a multitude of other atrocities. They're all attributed to God in what's called the Hebrew Bible, or in our Christian context, the Old Testament. Yeah. What do I have to say to that? What do you have to say to that? I totally disagree with this idea. This is what I can say. But how comes that from Adam and Eve, two boys had been born and then they have their own children? But how could that be? Now, can I ask you a question? Of course I can. How many children did Adam and Eve have? Okay, but did they really existed? No, let's say that we assume they existed. How many children did they have? Okay. I'm going somewhere with this. It's not hostile to you. Okay. You're going to say 2. Yes. Cain and Abel. Okay. Now we have 4 people on the face of the earth, right? Yeah. Adam and Eve. Yes. And 2 boys. Yes. So where did the next generation come from? Yes. So where did they come from? Would had a relation with their own mother. So you're saying that Cain and Abel became the husbands of their mother? I'm spelling this out because it's already obvious. Because in the traditional history of Judaism and the tradition of Christianity that reveres the Old Testament, if you interpret the book of Genesis to mean this, which I do not, by the way, but I'm saying the people who believe that the earth is 6,000 years old do, among which you and I are not numbered. But say we're talking about the people who believe the Earth is 6,000 years old, roughly 6,009 last September 23rd, the year 2013. 9 and 4 are 13, 2004 BC, according to Archbishop Usher. So therefore, the only way the human race could have multiplied from a single couple, Adam and Eve, and their two children, Cain and Abel, no daughters, right? Or had Adam and Eve daughters. Maybe they were shoved under the couch. But anyway, the only way the next generation could have come is if Cain and Abel had committed the extraordinary crime of being married to their own mothers. Or were there some sisters concealed behind the cupboard? Well, that's only moderately less worse. They would have had to marry their own sisters. So it's a Hobson's choice, whether we picture them marrying their mothers or marrying their sisters. That's the end of it. There were no cousins to marry. Even cousins would be bad enough. So this is absurd, but let me address this issue. None of us are saying that this is what the book of Genesis says. The book of Genesis is not saying this at all. So I want to rescue the book of Genesis just as I want to rescue Jesus. I want to rescue Jesus from his most fervent adherents today, who are his worst enemies. And I want to welcome the book of Genesis from its most fervent adherents today, which are the worst enemies of the book of Genesis. The book of Genesis, as I said, was written in, say, somewhere 5th, 6th century BC. The Jews were in exile in Babylon. What is the recent date for the origin of this earth as opposed to the origin of the universe? The origin of the universe is 14 point something billion, and it seems to be going back a little bit with every passing year. The book of Genesis was written 2,600 years ago. Who was closer to the moment of the origin of the universe, them or us today? We would have to admit that we know far more about the origins of the universe than a nomadic tribe did 600 years ago, wouldn't you think? So therefore, am I going to accept their view of the origin of things? Or am I going to accept some of the leading edge scientists today?
Hey, thank you very much. Thank you a lot for this presentation.
Thank you so much for having me. I greatly appreciate it. And greetings to all our friends in Romania, a country that's close to my heart. Thank you.
Afirmațiile exprimate în acest program nu aparțin producătorilor, colaboratorilor și cu atât mai puțin Televiziunii Române și ca atare nu pot fi atribuite acestora. Ele aparțin în exclusivitate Domnului Miceal Ledwith, care are o experiență bogată pe tărâm religios, inclusiv în sferele cele mai înalte ale Vaticanului. Producătorul și colaboratorii, precum și instituția Televiziunii Române, nu susțin și nu încurajează în niciun fel renunțarea la convingerile și credințele religioase proprii, care sunt o expresie majoră a libertății individuale. Televiziunea Română este deschisă la orice păreri și sugestii formulate decent, care susțin sau contrazic afirmațiile domnului Miceal Ledwith. Acestea vor putea constitui subiectul unor emisiuni viitoare. Ce aș putea să spun este că încă multe lucruri vor rămâne fără explicații sau la nivel de ipoteze logice sau doar simple speculații care își așteaptă confirmarea sau infirmarea. Infirmarea unei ipoteze, idei sau a unei speculații are rolul foarte important de a nu mai fi nevoie de alte investiții ale unor resurse materiale și umane pentru studierea acestora. Dar eu sunt optimist asupra faptului că știința ne va oferi o parte din răspunsuri, confirmări și infirmări mai repede decât am putea noi să bănuim. Gândiți-vă că deja se dezvoltă științe de frontieră, precum paleogenomică. A mai apărut recent o școală de medicină unică în lume până în acest moment și care se numește Institutul de Medicină Mitocondrială, care vine cu o nouă paradigmă medicală. Dacă amintim ramuri de convergențe ale științelor, avem gravitobiologia, o nouă biofizică aplicată sistemelor vii. Având în vedere faptul că emisiunile se vor păstra ulterior și pe internet, am inserat în dreptul fiecărei imagini de ilustrație sursa originală de unde puteți afla mai multe informații despre subiectul discutat. Pentru aceasta, apăsați butonul de pauză, copiați linkul indicat și căutați pe internet.